French taxi drivers today blocked roads and caused havoc in Paris and other major French cities in protest against Uber Pop. The drivers blocked the entrances to Paris's major airports and train stations, turned over cars, burned tires, and more. The drivers claim that Uber drivers break the country's transportation rules and should therefore be banned. For example, French taxi drivers pay more than $250,000 for an operating license, and Uber Pop drivers pay nothing. Kashmir Hill, this is, I think this shocks the sensibilities. I think people who follow the tech news are kind of shocked by all these images. But in fact, protests like this are something of a banality in France. They always, truck drivers, when they protest, they go big and they go hard and they block and stop everything. But do you think this will have any effect on French legislature, which may or may not end up banning Uber Pop?
Yeah, I mean, we see protests against Uber in the U.S., but they're not like this at all. This is pretty intense. Well, the thing is, Uber is already illegal, especially Uber Pop in France. And the New York Times had a piece recently on how cops will try to flag down Uber Pop drivers and give them tickets, but then Uber, will pay those tickets for the drivers, so they're continuing to operate. So I think the protest is more for discouraging passengers from using Uber. And we saw Courtney Love, apparently, the well-known singer, was in Paris. And so she was posting photos to Instagram of her car having been attacked. The windows were broken. She said she was being held hostage. So I think it's not so much targeted at legislature as it is at people who would use Uber Pop and say, hey, if you use it, you never know what's going to happen.
I have 2 points to make on this story before we move on. The first is that Uber Pop, even though it's mostly banned in France, gets people around just fine. And so instead of thinking about how they might saddle Uber drivers with all that regulation and rules, why not turn the taxi drivers loose and let them operate like Uber drivers? It's just a thought. Maybe they don't need all that regulation and so on. The other thought is, if you are in France, all the taxi drivers are busy blocking roads, you might try calling an Uber. They're the only ones operating.